This is every day.
Every single day for Adam Hamden recently has started with a phone call.
I am phoning immigration to report.
This is life now. Dozens of conditions imposed on a man who is far from free.
It's ridiculous. Why would an innocent man that's been deemed innocent after being judged too have to do this?
Moving to the U.S., then Canada, from the UAE years ago was supposed to be for a safer, better life. But over time, it got hard for the politically minded, outspoken, and sometimes angry Hamden to stay silent about the world and its violent spasms. His big trauma began when one of Canada's did. In the wrenching wake of the Parliament Hill shooting in 2014, Canada's police and security services went looking to see what they were missing on their radar of extremism. The RCMP started screenshotting parts of Facebook posts from several accounts run by Hamden. Of the thousands of posts, over 80 worried police. Some seemed to celebrate ISIS and lone wolves. Others identified places in Canada with weak security. The RCMP came knocking on his door in 2014 to talk about those posts.
Did they say to you, stop this?
No.
What was that conversation like?
That conversation was, hey Hamden, the topic that you're talking about is very sensitive. Some people might be offended by what you're saying. You might want to watch what you're saying.
He heard them but did not stop. In July of 2015, another visit from the RCMP, this time to arrest him and charge him with 4 terrorism offences, which are relatively rare in Canada.
They accused me of counseling murders for the benefit of a terrorist organization. Counseling murder, assault, and mischief, and some other charge that are generally incited terrorism.
Denied bail, he was held in jail for 2 full years before his trial.
To be very clear, you are not and were not a member of ISIS.
Never was, never will be.
Was there not a suggestion at some point that you had an ISIS flag in your cell?
There was a suggestion that I had drawn an ISIS flag, a graffiti on one of the court cells. And all I did is I wrote Islamic insignia. I mean, 6 years of government-funded propaganda is a very difficult message to counter.
When the BC Supreme Court finally heard the evidence, the judge found some of the content of Hamden's posts and reposts of what others had written repugnant, offensive, and troubling.
At first I was very perplexed.
An expert witness for the defense, Navaid Aziz of Calgary, who studies religious extremism and de-radicalization, looked at those posts too. He found them deeply uncomfortable.
I was like, oh, how could someone post some of this stuff? Like, even if you believe this stuff, is this stuff that you really want to be posting online? So I found it to be someone that hadn't thought through what they were trying to achieve.
Ultimately, he concluded Hamden was not a religious extremist.
He ended up finding purpose in his activism online, and had he channeled it properly and perhaps being more cautious in terms of what he was posting, his situation might be different.
The judge concluded Hamden didn't have the intent to commit a crime, and the posts and reposts did not cross a criminal line. By the end of the trial in 2017, the verdict, not guilty on any of the terrorism charges. That should have been the end of it.
It seems to me that...
But something happened next that both puzzles and angers law professor Kent Roach in Toronto, who studied and wrote about the case.
Someone who had been denied bail and detained for over 2 years was acquitted. You would expect that that person would walk free.
But he didn't. He was never released. Instead, after the trial, Hamden was sent immediately to immigration detention and held there for another 2 years, sometimes in solitary confinement. The court had called him not guilty, but the Immigration Division determined he was still a threat to Canada. His refugee status was revoked. The plan was to deport him.
A miscarriage of justice.
To Roach, it looks like when police didn't get the conviction they wanted, they just tried a different route to get to Hamden.
Of course, the immigration law has a lower standard, a much lower standard of proof. And so it seems to me that in the best of all worlds, the government would choose one of those instruments and not line them up sequentially. So if they lose a criminal case, they can come back with immigration detention. You know, it's kind of a heads I win, tails you lose.
So I'd order.
By 2019, after 4 years of custody, he was finally released,
Everything there is about my case, allegedly.
but with a raft of conditions while his lawyers fought his deportation order.
And this was filed to still say CBSA considers me a national security threat.
A few months ago, that deportation order was officially put on hold. It seems the nature of those posts and the terrorism charges, regardless of the verdict, could put him in danger in Jordan. Sending him back deemed too much of a risk. But he's also still considered a risk in Canada. The RCMP, CBSA, and Public Safety denied our requests for interviews or even clarification on why Hamdan continues to be perceived as a threat.
What is his status in this country?
Well, you know, it's the same status as the men that were detained under security certificates. It's the status of being under a cloud. For people like Mr. Hamdan, I think it's going to be a constant struggle.
It's more than a struggle. He now lives in a world where some people make it clear he's not wanted. After our first interview, word got out. People from Christina Lake started reaching out, saying they're afraid of Hamdan, but don't want to say that on camera. We arranged for another interview in another town.
I started to get emails and phone calls from people in the community who were angry. And again, I kept hearing from them, how could he post these things and not say he's sorry?
There's nothing to apologize about. Like, what have I done that requires remorse? That I talked about the conflict in the Middle East freely and expressed that all sides commit crimes, including ISIS, including Al-Qaeda, including the Canadian government. And I'm trying to go forward. I'm trying to be the model citizen, yet still the Canadian government has the audacity to say I'm dangerous.
And here's the persistent dilemma. In the eyes of the criminal court, Hamdan isn't guilty. But in the eyes of the RCMP and the immigration officials who now determine his fate, he remains a threat and has to go. So now what? He fights back legally, has now been granted a work permit and limited access to the internet.
Legal fights over freedom of expression and censorship. This is for every individual. This is human rights.
Adam Hamdan is in Canada but not Canadian, out of jail but not free, not guilty, but for too many, not innocent either.